Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's message. I'm Eric, the lead pastor of South Mountain Community Church. Thank you for taking just a bit of your time to be with us today. We exist for one reason, and that's to help as many people as possible take their next step towards becoming fully devoted and fully delighted followers of Jesus Christ. And I know that for so many people, church and even religion can be messy and oh so complicated, but it doesn't have to be that way. Here you can belong before you believe. So our hope is that your first visit with us is enjoyable, meaningful, and unlike the church experiences of your past. We also think that the best way to experience delight is with others in person. So SMCC is about more than just a Sunday sermon. We have 5 locations for you to choose from where you can connect with people in authentic community. We want every message you hear to engage your head, your heart, and your hands for a life of full delight. So with all of that in mind, enjoy today's message.
All right. Well, for those of you I haven't met, my name's Trevor. I serve as one of the pastors here. Man, I've got a couple of dad jokes that, so my sister-in-law and I, we're both big fans of them, and I'm trying to decide, like, which way do I go? Is this a disaster to start with this, or I'm just going to throw out a couple of them, just a couple of them. We'll see how this goes. Okay, why is justice a dish that is best served cold? Because if it was served warm, it would be just water. That's not bad. That's not bad, right? I got a new camouflage jacket last week, but I'm going to have to return it. I just can't see myself wearing it. and then the final one would be, what does a cloud wear under his raincoat? Thunderwear. Thunderwear. Yeah. I needed like a good closer, but I didn't have any of them because dad jokes are pretty consistently just like low bar. Okay, so with that, glad you're here. Happy Father's Day. Looking forward to the time together. All right, I want to open up with an observation that I think actually describes something that's true, something that's at the heart of relationships between a lot of fathers and their children. And this is it, that relationships between their fathers and their children are often complicated. I think complicated is a word that actually describes the relationship between fathers and their children quite well, because so much of the time there are really good aspects to the relationship, but also there are pieces to the relationship that are not perfect. And what I'd like to do is actually share with you a poem that I think really gets to the heart of this dynamic particularly well. The poem's by Robert Hayden. It's called Those Winter Sundays. And it goes like this. It says, those winter Sundays. So the title gives us the context. This is taking place in the winter season of the year, so it's cold. That matters for the poem. Sundays too. My father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. Basically, the author is an adult looking back on his childhood and remembering his father through the lens of his experience. And one of the things that he's recounting is the way that his father actually served and cared for and loved the family well in this particular way. That day in and day out, he was working in the midst of the cold, the brutal, the harsh weather. It took a toll on his body. His hands were cracked. And yet even on Sundays, the one day he didn't have to go to work, he's still waking up early before the rest of the family to build a fire so the house is warm by the time everyone else gets out of bed. He's saying he did this day in and day out for years, for his entire childhood, and never was he thanked. And so he's remembering that. But if we jump to the next stanza, we begin to see another direction. It says, I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. And I think this is where we begin to see some of the complication within the relationship inserting itself into the poem. That while the father did endure this kind of brutal reality day in and day out, that took a toll on him emotionally to the point where chronic angers were something that marked this person's experience growing up. And so he would rise and dress slowly, not wanting to go out. Fear is really how he learned to navigate the home that he grew up within. And so as a child and in certain seasons of his life, this was the primary lens through which he understood what his father had contributed. But now he's at a certain point in his life where he's seeing all of it, right? He's seeing the good things, he's seeing the bad things, and the final stanza closes like this. So speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well, what did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? That essentially the author's looking back on his own relationship with his father and seeing just how complicated, just how mixed, just how messy it actually was. And I think that's true for so many of us, that our relationships with our fathers or our relationships with our kids are complicated. Because for many of us, there are some of the best things that we have in life, so many of the good pieces of who we are, the qualities that we carry are things that were shaped and given to us by our fathers. And so there's good things, and yet at the same time, there are, I think for many of us, there are limps and wounds that we carry that stem from the very same source. And so the relationship is often complicated. Now, in light of that, what I want to do is actually just pose a question specifically to those who are dads in the room this morning. And so if you're a father, this is the question I want to ask. Are you a good father? I think what's interesting is that almost entirely, like 100% of the time, I think when a father is faced with a question like that, when a dad faces a question like that, there's like hesitancy and a difficulty to answer the question, and even some negative emotions that rise up within the person. And hear me, I'm not trying to provoke guilt at all this morning. I just think it's interesting that when a question like that is put forth, it's so difficult to answer it in the positive, and so often what rises up is actually these negative feelings inside. And my hope today is not to press further into the negativity for the sake of making anyone feel worse, but instead to hopefully be able to walk away today seeing how we could lean into the responsibilities that we do carry as fathers in a way that is maybe built on something a bit more solid, a bit more hopeful, and a bit more helpful. And so with that, what I'd like to do is actually just kind of move into our series. So what we're talking about today, we're continuing the series, Questions Jesus Asked. What we learned last week is that Jesus actually asked a ton of questions. Over 300 of them are recorded throughout the New Testament writings. And there's one question, or actually a set of two questions that are paired together that he asks that tie directly into this theme that we're talking about together today. And the questions come right here. Matthew chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, in the middle of a sermon that Jesus gave, not just once, but likely many times, traveling around delivering the same message. And this comes within one section of it where he says this: which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? It's a rhetorical question. He's not actually looking for an answer, but these are two questions that he pairs together to make a particular point. Okay, so within the context, this is coming within a broader sermon. And the sermon as a whole, Jesus is trying to basically take people who have been living under the law. The law has been what's dictated their relationship with God. He's trying to lead them, kind of show the futility of trying to navigate a relationship with God according to the law, and instead lead them into a relationship with God based on him, based on Jesus, based on the second person of the Trinity. And so that's what he's attempting to do. And even within this particular section, just prior to these questions, he opens up by saying, inviting people to basically seek, ask, and knock in the context of their relationship with God, saying that if you seek, you will, if you ask, you shall receive. Then he moves into these questions, saying that even you, and the way he phrases it, it's almost kind of insulting in a way, where he's like, even you, as bad and as horrible and as awful as you are, I'm sure he didn't mean it like that, but even you know how to give good gifts to your children. You don't give them a snake when they ask for a fish. You don't give them a stone when they ask for bread. And so his point is, how much more, it's what he flows into directly after, how much more does your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? And so, of course, the natural question that arises is, what gift in particular is he encouraging them, is he teaching them to ask for? And when we take into consideration the entire context, I think what we can see is that Jesus himself is the gift that we're to seek, that we're to ask, that we're to knock for, that if we ask for, we shall receive a relationship with God, not based on the law, not based on religion, but one based on him. And so that's the broader context in which these questions arise. And yet, I think there's something that's really easy to pass over within these questions, that Jesus makes an assumption that I find to be very, very profound. The assumption being that those who were fathers in the crowd that particular day had a desire to be good fathers, had some sense of an understanding of what it means to be good fathers, and that in some ways they were good fathers, that some aspects of what they had provided for their children was actually good. And I think it's worth taking some time with that assumption that Jesus makes and not rushing over it, but instead hanging out with it for just a little bit. And that's actually what I'd like to do together this morning, is to kind of build on that particular assumption. And as we do so, what I'd like to do in this conversation is actually just kind of speak to three specific camps of people. I want to speak to three specific camps on this particular day. And the camps are, first off, fathers of young children, fathers whose children are still within the home. Second off, fathers of adult children, children who, are out of the house or maybe still in the house, but at the very least, they're not kids anymore, right? They're adults making their own decisions, not accountable to you. They are their own adults. And then third and finally, I'd like to speak to those who are not fathers, but who might one day become them. And let me just say this, that I understand as I lay that out, what that means is that I'm actually missing a significant portion of the room today and that I'm not addressing you directly. And my hope is that as we move through this, even if I'm not addressing you directly, because every one of our lives has been shaped in a significant way by a father, that this will still prove relevant and meaningful for all of us, because every single one of us has been impacted by a father, either by their presence or even by their absence. And so the hope is that as we move through these three direct kind of groups, it'll prove relevant and meaningful for all of us. So that's where I'd like to go. Sound good? Okay. I think I heard one person whisper over there. So, all right. Okay, that's where I'd like to go. All right, with that, I want to jump into the first one, which is fathers of young children. That's who I want to speak to first. Now, here's the thing. I had my first child. We had our first child when I was 22 years old, which is not young for Utah, but anywhere else in the country, that is young to have kids. And man, I feel like I have been exhausted ever since. And in some ways, I wonder if that's just what life looks like until the end after that. But and so if you feel that way, I want you to know that you're not alone, and that in some ways, I think it's natural to feel tired in this season of life. But in light of that, there's also one other thought that I'd like to put before you today, and it's this, that you have less time left than you think. That when it comes to the amount of time that you have with your kids still at home, you have less time left than you think. And so there's actually, I came across this illustration through a friend a while back of sort of a parenting trick, a way of taking these 18 years that we get with our kids in sort of kind of close proximity with them, that takes that amount of time that so often kind of slips through our fingers so quickly, and before you know it, it's over. The whole idea is making that time sort of physical, practical, concrete in front of you so that instead of it slipping through your fingers, you're able to make the absolute most of it. And what it actually is a jar filled with marbles. And so this is a jar filled with marbles. Now, the interesting thing is, if you multiply 18 times 52, 18 years times 52 weeks, what you end up with is 936. I found this out on the internet. They don't teach math at Bible college, but so 936 weeks is what you get, essentially, right? That is kind of a way you can round out to it. Now, the idea is for every week that your kids every week that goes by, you remove one marble from the jar as a way of making it very clear how much time you have left with them. So my wife and I, we have 3 kids, 10-year-old, 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old. I only made a jar for our oldest because who has time for the other ones, right? If that stung for any middle childs, I'm a youngest, so I didn't get a jar either, just so you know. but our oldest, she's 10. And so I did the math, and I found out that the amount of weeks that we have left with her, according to this calculation, right, if you take 936, kind of subtract it down according to her age and the weeks in this year so far, we have 395 weeks left. That means even though she just seems like a kid still, like she's still little, and the thought of her moving out and moving on is like the most difficult thing to comprehend in the world, we actually have over half of our time already gone. Right? That 936 is filled to the top, and we have less than half of that left. And the point of the illustration is, not to get us into a place where you're like, oh man, I've wasted so much time and I feel horrible and it's awful. It's not to get caught up with what we wish we had done with the marbles that are already gone. But the idea is to lean into and to get the most out of the marbles that we still have left. What can we do with those to get the absolute most out of the weeks, out of the time that we still have left with our kids in this unique season of life? Now, obviously, our relationship with them doesn't end when they move out, and yet I do think that this is a unique season in life to lean into and to take advantage of. And so what does that look like, right? Just a couple of suggestions. I think on the one hand, quality time. There's something to be said for looking into quality time. All right, so I remember hearing this on a book a long time ago where basically you draw like a Venn diagram for your family where within each person's circle you highlight what's fun for them, what they enjoy doing. And so maybe this person likes fishing and skiing and reading, and maybe this person likes movies and swimming and camping and all of that. And the idea is you do that for every person within your family, for all the kids, and at the end of the day, the goal is to basically find the overlap between everyone so that you can begin to build rhythms weekly, daily, annually around those particular things, because those are the things that you actually enjoy doing the most and that they enjoy the most also. And you can build rhythms of quality time together that way. And so, you know, you probably could tell from the poem from the beginning, we tend to be a bit of a bookish family. So we've raised our kids to be bookish too. So we're working our way through Harry Potter right now. We read it pretty much every night before bed. And if you have read those, you know that especially when you're reading out loud, that is a journey. That is a long time to get through those books. We're about halfway through, but it's something that we all look forward to. You know, we also enjoy camping, so that's something we build into our summers. But maybe it's something different. Maybe it's sports. Maybe it's playing catch. Maybe it's, you know, watching certain types of movies. Maybe it's, you know, a breakfast date at McDonald's. But how can you build rhythms into your relationship of quality time? I think that's important. And then the second piece is actually paying attention to something called junk time. Jerry Seinfeld says this, the comedian. He says, I always talk about being a parent. People talk about quality time. I like to talk about garbage time. Bowl of cereal at 11 at night, that's garbage time. And I think in some ways this is actually easy to overlook, that there is so much kind of junk in garbage time that makes up our lives when you've got to run errands or do this thing or take care of something over here. And one of the ways we can actually invest in the relationship with our kids is just to take them along as we do. To lean into the junk time, the garbage time, to make it time together. And so I think those are two helpful things. Proverbs 22:6 says this, start children off in the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. It's basically saying that as we make the most of the marbles of the weeks that we do have left, that in some sense, we're setting a direction for our kids and giving them a likelihood that they will move in a particular direction. Now, kids make their own decisions. Everyone makes their own decisions, but we can give them the best possible chance to move in a certain direction. And I know with my wife and I, when we talk about kind of where we want our kids to end up, this is kind of how we describe our goal. This is how we would put it, that we want our kids to grow into responsible, considerate adults who trust and enjoy Jesus and who want to spend time with us. That even when they're old and grown and making their own decisions, that they don't have to spend time with us. We want them to be in a place in our relationship to be in a place where they want to spend time with us. We want to give them the best chance possible to choose to trust Jesus and to build a life on finding joy in honoring and in serving Him. Ultimately, that's their decision. We can't make it for them, but we want to do what we can to set them up well for that decision. And then finally, when it comes to being respectful and considerate, we also want them to be the type of people that we want to spend time with, right? Because they want to spend time with us, but we don't with them. That wouldn't be a win either. So we're trying to shape them into a particular type of people and to give them a chance to have a good life with Jesus and with us. And so if your approach is somewhat different than that, not trying to say that anything is wrong about that, just trying to share some things that might be helpful in this season of life. So that's fathers of young children. All right, now jumping forward into the next category, which is fathers of adult children. Bit of a caveat here. I don't have adult children, so I'm speaking outside of the realm of my experience, as you probably know. And so take all of this with a grain of salt, and yet even still, I think this is what I'd like to throw out to that particular group of people. Daniel Pink, the author and researcher, he recently conducted the world's largest study on regret. And one of the central findings of his research was that across the scope of people's lives, their most significant regrets actually fall into 4 different categories. That there are 4 types of regrets that tend to stick with people, not for a day or a week or a month, but for years, for decades of their lives even, that if they have a regret that sticks with them like that, chances are it's one of these 4 categories. And so these are the 4. First off, foundation regrets. I wish I, had started investing and saving in my 20s for retirement rather than blowing money on things I can't even remember what they were. Or I wish I had started exercising, walking every day rather than, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. That's a foundation regret. Number 2, boldness regrets. I wish I had, taken that trip when I had the chance to do it. I wish I had studied abroad. I wish I had pursued this romantic relationship. I wish I had gotten married. I wish I had had kids. I wish I had done these things. I wish I had taken these opportunities while I had the chance to do them, because now I don't. I wish I had the courage, right? Those are boldness regrets. Number 3, moral regrets. I wish I hadn't done this. I wish I hadn't bullied that kid in elementary school. I wish I had been kinder to this person that everyone else was awful to. I wish I hadn't had that affair, right? I wish that when I knew this thing was wrong that I didn't do it, and yet I did. Those are moral regrets. And then the 4th and final one is connection regrets, which has everything to do with relationships. That I wish I had invested in this relationship so that it was still present within my life, and yet I didn't, and I just kind of let it fall to the wayside. Now it's not there. Or, we had this fight, this kind of blew up, and then we never worked through it on the other side. And ever since then, the relationship has just been non-existent, and I regret that. These are the 4 types of regret, the 4 core types of regret. And so when it comes to fathers of adult children, I think it's true to say that the category that has the most significant potential for regret is connection, where I think it's possible to find ourselves looking back on the years when our kids were growing up and wishing that we had done things differently. Maybe we did things to the best of our ability. We did things as best as we could. Maybe we didn't. But either way, we can look back and see where our relationship is with our kids now, and see that if we had just done things differently, things would be entirely different today. And there can be some significant regret that comes with that. And if that's a place that you've found yourself in, that you're in even today, I think what I want to share with you is just this passage from Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 2 and 4. It says this: "It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart." Right? Kind of an interesting passage, not so uplifting, but what it's essentially saying is that we have a finite amount of time, and so for that reason, when we lean into mourning, there's something that comes from that actually leads to better lives than if we just lean into feasting. The author goes on to say, "Frustration is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure." Right? You see this contrast through the entire passage. And it's saying that in some ways, leaning into the negative emotions, the sadness, the mourning, the grief, is actually more beneficial. And I have to think that regret plays a significant role in what this is describing. Because I think sometimes when we carry significant regret like that, the tendency to, the way we react to it is to say, the past is the past. There's nothing I can do about that, so I'm just not going to think about it. I'm going to block it out. I'm going to lean into these other things over there. I'm going to stuff it. I'm going to ignore it because I can't change it. And the truth is, you can't change it. And yet, the passage, I think, is still highlighting something that is so significant, that when we do lean into the sadness and the grief and the regret, in some ways, our most significant regrets can actually point us and clarify for us what we value most. That our regrets that are most significant within our lives actually paint a picture of what we care about the most. And so if we can hang on to that and lean into it, what it actually does, rather than leaving us there in despair, it gives us the chance to recognize what matters most to us, and in response to that, to change how we move forward. To change how we act in the present and the types of relationships we want to build in the future. Because if that's one of the most significant regrets that you carry, chances are, if you just continue to stuff it and ignore it, it will only get more and more severe until finally the day comes when the opportunity to rebuild the relationship is gone. And that's why what I want to share with you this morning is that the benefit of leaning into the regret now, realizing how much this matters to you now, is that the possibility to redeem the relationship is still there. The chance to rebuild moving forward is still there. As long as you're alive and as long as they're alive, the chance to do so is still present. You can still send the text or make the phone call or plan the trip or write the letter or, get a shared Marco Polo, whatever it is, you can still begin to rebuild the relationship today. And I get that so often we feel this kind of hesitancy and this awkwardness around it, that we're afraid of rejection or that they're not going to be interested, they're not going to want it, and it's going to be too painful. And so I think so often that can kind of keep us from moving forward, keep us from trying to rebuild the relationship. But I think when our imagination starts to move in that way, one of the most helpful things we can do is actually just kind of reverse the roles. Right, so just imagine if your adult son or your adult daughter was to call you up and to say this to you. Imagine if they said this. Said, hey, Dad, I know it's been a while. Just wanted to say, I love you. I miss you. I really would love to have more of a relationship with you than what we've had in the past. And if that's something that you want to, maybe we could plan some time together. My question is, how would you respond if one of them called you up and said that? Because the chances are, however you would respond is exactly how they would to you as well. Okay, so that's fathers of adult children. Third and final category, fathers, those who are not yet fathers, but who one day might become them. All right, so one of the interesting things I feel like with each kind of generation that comes and goes, more and more, we see this trend is that there is sort of less and less of a desire to build a life on some of the commitments that for so long have actually made life really meaningful. Things like a particular vocation or living in a certain place for significant chunks of time. Things even like marriage and fatherhood. And I think what's interesting about all of that is that, part of it's because we have more freedom than ever before, more options than ever before to actually kind of travel and experience the world and pursue different things. And I think a lot of that is a very, very good thing. And there's nothing wrong with taking advantage of that. And yet, if you pursue that course to its fullest extent, one of the drawbacks of it is that you actually end up missing out on some of the commitments that have the ability to make life so incredibly meaningful, like fatherhood. And so, biblically speaking, if you go back to the very opening of the Bible, one of the things we see is that God actually creates humanity and gives them a particular responsibility that plays directly into what we're talking about today. So Genesis 1:27-28 says this, first chapter of the Bible. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, meaning have children. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So God gives humanity this responsibility to essentially have children, multiply, and spread over the earth in order to cultivate it, bring order to it, to bring about its flourishing. That this is humanity's responsibility, one of the primary responsibilities we've been given. And what you see is that in the very next chapter, it's actually paired with the design of marriage. Right, that in order to fulfill the task we've been given, it requires that we actually have and raise children. And you see the pairing of marriage being really the avenue for how that comes about. As marriage, as it's designed within Genesis 1 and 2, is actually the union of two things that are different, male and female. And as those two things unite, it gives birth to new life. And so what I mean to say is, the point of saying all of that is that when we raise children, it's actually when we make the decision to commit to another person in marriage and to have and raise children with them, we're doing something that is actually very much in alignment with what we're intended to be and do. Now, that comes with a huge caveat that I feel the need to throw out here. First off, the world is broken. And that brokenness extends to our bodies. And what that means is sometimes the brokenness means that we're not actually able to have children. And that can be an incredibly painful reality. And I think that's worth noting. And in addition to that, sometimes whether by circumstances or even just people making the decision to remain single throughout their lives. That is a legitimate and a valid decision. And in no way is a person less than fully human or less than created in the complete image of God if they do choose to remain single, right? I mean, Jesus himself was single and he lived the most full and complete human life that we could ever imagine. So it wouldn't make any sense to say otherwise. And yet, even with all of that being the case, I think it's still true to say that biblically speaking, it's a theological truth that when we raise children, we honor a significant piece of what God created us for. And really, as we do so, we're giving a gift, not just to the kids that we're raising, but even to the world in which we send them. We're giving a gift, right? As we kind of care for and mentor and challenge and comfort and pour into and love these particular people, as we do the best we can to set them up well for life, to be respectful and considerate adults who are responsible, who we want to spend time with, we are essentially presenting a gift to the world, which is the very same gift that others presented for us. Because other people made the decision to raise children who then grew up to be the adults who kept the world turning while you and I were growing up. And when we make the same decision, we're presenting a gift to the world in that we are creating the adults who will keep the world turning while other people are growing up as well. And so we're presenting a gift as we do so. And really, at the end of the day, if you're in this particular camp, what I would want you to hear is that of all the options available to pursue in this life, fatherhood is a beautiful one. And I think one thing we can all agree on, right, no matter what kind of dad we had or we wish we had, no matter what kind of dad we were or are or desire to be, I think the bottom line is that a good father is a great gift. Now, real quick, as we get ready to close here, just kind of going back to the passage at the beginning, the two questions that Jesus put together. Right, again, one of the things we see is the natural question that arises, the most significant question is, what is Jesus instructing the people he's talking to ask for? And the truth is, I think he's instructing them to ask for him, for a relationship with God that is not based on the law, but one that is based on him and on what he has accomplished through his life and his death on the cross. Because the interesting thing is, what the New Testament writings make clear is that when we place trust in Jesus, we actually are brought into the family of God. God adopts us and we become his children and he becomes our father. John 1:12-13 says this, "Yet to all who did receive him, who received Jesus, to those who believed in his name, who trusted Jesus, he gave the right to become children of God," which means apart from a relationship with Jesus, we actually aren't children of God. But when we place trust in him and build our lives on him, what that leads us into is the family of God, where we become his children and God becomes our father. Children born not of natural descent nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. And I find it so fascinating that of all of the metaphors that were available, of all of the different relationships, of all of the different ways that God could have described his relationship to us, what he chose to select is that of the relationship between a father and his children. And I think what that leads us to understand is the type of relationship God desires with us, the type of relationship he wants to have with us. And ultimately, the gospel truth at the end of the day is that Jesus died and rose for us so that we could have the perfect heavenly Father. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we give you praise that you lived the life that we never could, that you fulfilled the law in all of its entirety. You lived the perfect life. And as a result of that, you gave yourself on the cross in our place. And then you rose from the grave in victory over our brokenness and over death and over sin. And you've invited us into the relationship with you where God is our Father. And so we thank you and we praise you for that this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's message and trusting us with your time. If you'd like to connect with one of our pastors or staff, you can easily do that by visiting smccutah.org/connect. When you fill out that quick form, they will get back to you within a few days and be able to connect with you. As well, if you'd like to know more about taking a next step at SMCC, you can easily look at what next steps we have by visiting smccutah.org/next steps. And lastly, if you found today's message both hopeful and helpful, I would encourage you to do maybe one of two things. First, you can share this message with someone that would find it helpful. And you can also choose to partner with us financially so that more people can see messages like this. You can find more information on what that looks like by visiting smccutah.org/give. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you at one of our locations soon.